Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Charles Kalinzi and I'm here to present you my research findings about uh, quantification of performance expectation gap in public works contracts in Uganda. Research in performance expectation gap is quite scarce, and this concept is deeply rooted in auditing and marketing literature, and we are trying to replicate it in public procurement simply because what we are seeing in marketing and auditing literature is resembling what is happening in public procurement. Why? Because the technical people who are charged with the responsibility of implementing um, comment access roads are not doing it in the way that the road users expect them to do. So there has been a mismatch in their performance, the actual performance, and then the perceived performance, creating a performance expectation gap. So how did we conceptualize this concept of performance expectation gap in public procurement? In trying to understand this concept, we conceptualize the gap to be that significant difference in the attainment of performance expectations between the technical users and the road users. And by the technical users, we mean those ones who are charged with the responsibility of drafting, implementing common access roads, and then the road users to refer to those ones who are charged with the responsibility of oversight, monitoring, and supervision of what they do. So this research proposes a performance expectation gap index, which will be used to measure the performance expectation gap. As earlier on told you, the previous researchers have been trying to study this concept from a qualitative point of view, and this research is the first of its kind that is trying to quantify the extent of this performance expectation gap. So we are proposing a performance expectation gap index, which is given by the formula 1 minus the absolute value of the summation of all the different forms of gaps. By gaps, we mean there could be a performance efficiency gap, there could be a performance reasonableness gap, there could be a performance standards gap. So when you combine all these gaps, 1 minus the absolute value of this gives you the performance expectation gap index. And this index will tell us whether the gap is really wide or the gap is really narrow. And depending on how wide or how narrow, that's when we shall assume that the extent to which the technical staff meets the road users' expectations is either narrow or very tight. So what were you asking ourselves in this research? We were asking ourselves the following questions. One, is there a difference in the performance expectations between the technical users and road users? If this difference exists, is it possible to quantify this difference in performance expectations? And what implications does this performance expectation gap, if at all it exists, offers to the policymakers and the managerial users in Uganda? We adopted, in terms of methodology, a cross-sectional survey across the whole country. We visited most of the districts, and we also conducted interviews to understand the performance, how the road users perceived the performance expectations, and also how the technical people thought about how they implemented the performance in their roadworks. So we conceptualized performance expectation gap in terms of the extent of achieving performance efficiency, the extent to which performance effectiveness is achieved, and the extent to which performance reasonableness is achieved. How do we compute the index? We compute the index by first of all getting the mean differences, and then aggregating these mean differences, and eventually computing the manual witness test. And our data analysis, as you can see, for each of the category of respondents, for the road users and then the technical personnel, we were trying to look at how each of these categories understood the extent to which the technical users achieved performance efficiency, performance effectiveness, and performance reasonableness. And we got the mean values and standard deviation, and then the mean period differences, and then the manual witness test. And from this, we computed the performance expectation gap. As you can see from the computation, it gives us a gap of 35%, meaning that the technical personnel in our districts can only achieve a performance of up to 65% in the stakeholders' point of view. So the remaining 35% is what creates the gap. What's the implication of this gap in public procurement? First of all, this research ignites the debate as to whether what has been previously qualitatively described can be quantified. And the moment we start quantifying the extent of the expectation gap, it will be an eye-opener to the donors of these community roadwork projects to see the extent to which their money has been used to meet the intended expectations of the road users. Conclusion, we conclude by saying that this is the first research of its kind to quantify the performance expectation gap, and will go a long way in trying to understand the extent to which the funders can use their money to minimize the performance expectation gap in Uganda. Thank you.